4. Mike. Tom, Daniel 2, 31 through 43. Actually, make that through 31 through 42. Okay, I need another one. Keith, Daniel 2, 43 through 45. I need another one. Lori, Daniel 8, 19 through 22. Okay, I don't know that we'll get this far today, but we'll try. I need one more. Jeremiah 25, Dick, verse 11. And then you can also, can you remember two? Isaiah 44, 28. And Isaiah 44, 28. And I need one more. Right here, Ezra 1, 1 through 4. Sorry I missed you back there, Nathan, if you were raising your hand earlier. All right, so let's go. So first part's just a quick review. Last week, we looked at 3 different invasions out of Babylon. And I'm not going to reread that. We read that last week. And they were during the reigns of Jehoiakim, king of Israel, Jehoiakim, his son, king of Israel. So Jehoiakim is K-I-M, Jehoiakim is C-H-I-N for the endings. And then finally Zedekiah. And 3 times the Bible talks about Nebuchadnezzar coming down and attacking Jerusalem and subduing it. And the last one in 587 BC, it completely destroyed Jerusalem. And so confirming the Bible story, we saw last week that sure enough, the Babylonian Chronicles confirmed this. Nebuchadnezzar himself has his historians write down all 3 of these invasions, confirming the Bible history. Another interesting story is in Jeremiah 36, 1 through 8. So who has that passage? Okay.
In the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Take a scroll, write on it all the words I have spoken to you concerning Israel, Judah, and all the other nations from the time I began speaking to you in the reign of Josiah.
Little louder, Rich. A little louder if you can.
All right. Perhaps when the people of Judah hear about every disaster I plan to inflict on them, they will each turn from their wicked ways. Then I will forgive their wickedness and their sin. So Jeremiah called Baruch, son of Uriah, and while Jeremiah dictated all the words the Lord had spoken to him, Baruch wrote them on the scroll. Then Jeremiah told Baruch, I am restricted. I am not allowed to go to the Lord's temple. So you go to the house of the Lord on the day of fasting and read to the people from the scroll the words of the Lord that you wrote as I dictated.
Let's stop right there to save a little time. Okay, so in this story, Jeremiah, by the way, went to Egypt. They kicked him out of Jerusalem, and he was in Egypt, and he was writing this book. He wrote Lamentations, which we're actually going to study in April or May, in April sometime, and it's just this lament because Babylon is now destroying Israel and Jerusalem, and he predicts that's going to happen. But he has Neriah, son of Baruch, come, and he tells him to write out his prophecies and take it to the temple because they won't let him in Jerusalem. And so if you read the rest of the story, it's a great story. He goes and reads it there, and one of the king's officials hears it, and then the king gets the scroll and takes it to the king and reads it to the king, and he'd read a few lines, and the king would take a knife and cut it and throw the scroll in the fire. Well, needless to say, things didn't turn out too well for that king. But so what would happen is scribes were experts at writing. So he wrote the prophecies of Jeremiah. And what you would do with these scrolls to authenticate them is you'd roll them up and you'd put a wax seal on them so that if someone broke the seal, you knew it had been broken. And then you would take a signet ring, and while that wax was still warm, you would put your signet in there so you could know who actually had sealed that scroll. Well, interestingly, and this was a really amazing find, but they found a signet ring dated from about the time of Jeremiah, and on it, it says Berechiah, which would be Baruch, son of Neriah. Now, what are the odds? And here's the interesting thing. It's the right time. It's the right name. And how many people do you think were literate back then? And how many people do you think were scribes that had a signet ring that they would stick in the wax? Very few people. And so to argue, well, this is another Baruch. Oh, yeah, that was literate, was a scribe and had a signet ring? I don't think so. And so they actually found something that proves the existence of the scribe. Okay, so it's during, and we're going to talk mainly about Daniel today, but I thought that was an interesting little archaeological evidence that I would like to share with you. We're going to talk mainly about Daniel. So it's during this invasion, the first invasion with Jehoiakim, and if you read the Bible, and we read this last week, he came and captured Jehoiakim and took him to Babylon. And we know that he took a bunch of officials with him because of the Babylonian history and what we're going to read here in the Bible. But who has Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 4? Okay? All four of them, and speak up.
Okay. In the third year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon advanced against Jerusalem and laid it under siege. Now the Lord delivered King Jehoiakim of Judah into his power, along with some of the vessels of the temple of God. He brought them to the land of Babylonia, to the temple of his God, and put vessels in the treasury of his God. The king commanded Ashpenaz, who was in charge of the court officials, to choose some of the Israelites who were of royal and noble descent, young men in whom there were no physical defect and who were handsome, well-versed in all kinds of wisdom, well-educated and having keen insight, and who were capable of entering the king's royal service and to teach them the literature and language of the Babylonians.
Okay, so he said, bring me some of the young men of Jerusalem that we've captured. So not only did he take Jehoiakim, but this was a very common practice. They took a whole bunch of the royal entourage. Now, why would they do that? Because they were educated. And not very many people were educated back in those times, and these were smart people. So they'd bring them into the palace, and they would usually make them eunuchs, so they didn't have to worry about them doing anything except what the king wanted them to do. And then they would utilize their brain. And so he said, bring me some of the smarter people so we can make them eunuchs and make them useful to us. We'll put them to work. A lot of times they'd make them be administrators or writers. And so that's how Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego ended up in the palace. And so when they're there, you remember this story is Nebuchadnezzar has a dream early on, but he is suspicious of his wise men. And so Nebuchadnezzar, being pretty bright himself, said, well, I'm not going to tell you what the dream is. You're going to have to tell me the dream or I'm going to kill all of you. So Daniel heard this, and they were in the wise men and went back and told Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, boy, this is horrible. We may get slaughtered. So we need to start praying to God that he'll reveal us the dream. And he revealed the dream to Daniel. And so in Daniel chapter 2, verse 31 through 43, who has that? You have 31. Yeah, you got the last two verses. Okay, loud and quickly. Y'all may want to read along because I'm trying to make up time. Go for it.
You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron, partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, all together, were broken in pieces, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hands he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay.
Let's stop right there. Okay. So here's his dream. It's a statue. And so it has this head of gold. And then it has and I'm looking here for it to myself. So what was it? Was the next part silver and then bronze and then iron mixed with clay? Okay. So you have the head of gold, and he says this is the first kingdom, and it's Babylon. Then he says, but after you are going to come the Medes and the Persians. Well, he's going to tell us a second kingdom, and then a third kingdom, and then a fourth kingdom. Now, in Daniel 5:28, Daniel is still alive when the Medes and Persians come and destroy Babylon. And so he's predicting the next kingdom. And in 5:28, we find out it's going to be the Medes and Persians. But then he goes on way beyond his lifetime and says that there's going to be a third kingdom of bronze. And we're going to learn from Daniel chapter 8 that Daniel predicts that kingdom will be Greece. And so now he's predicting the kingdom that's way beyond him, and there's going to be a fourth kingdom. And now he doesn't identify that kingdom, but we know from the Bible that the fourth major kingdom after Babylon and the Medes and Persians and the Greeks were the Romans. And so he's saying there's going to be these four kingdoms ahead of time, and he calls the Medes and Persians out during the time of Nebuchadnezzar before they come. You're going to find out in Daniel 8. And then he says that the next one after them are going to be the Greeks. He says that as well in chapter 8. And then there's going to be a fourth kingdom. And he says, now during that fourth kingdom, this is going to happen.
As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage. But they will not hold together, just as iron and clay does not mix, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall happen after this. This dream is certain in its interpretation, sure.
Okay, so now we know and believe that this stone not made with human hands is Jesus, and that he's going to destroy these kingdoms and set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. Now, for those who have premillennial beliefs of the Bible, they think this hasn't happened yet, that Jesus is going to come back and set an earthly kingdom up here. I'm not going to get into all that. That's a whole nother complicated story. But it is during the time of this fourth kingdom that Jesus comes during the Roman Empire to set up his kingdom. So Daniel calls out by name, and he calls out by name the Medes and Persians in chapter 5. He calls out by name the Greeks in chapter 8. We're going to see some of that. And the Greeks didn't come until hundreds of years after the time of Daniel. And so the next thing we're going to look at is that dream in chapter 8. Now, did I assign anybody chapter 8, 1 through 8? I don't think so. So I'm going to tell you, let's see, I did assign, though, who did I assign 19 through 22, Daniel 8 to? Okay, hang on one second. Okay, so here's what happens. I'm going to tell you the dream in verses 1 through 8, just to save you a little time. So there's a ram with one horn, and two horns rather, and a goat with one horn in the middle, and the ram and goat have a battle, and the goat wins. And then the goat's horn breaks off, and four horns grow up in its place. And that's the dream he had, and now Daniel's going to receive the interpretation of the dream, and that's what's in Daniel 8, verses 19 through 22.
Excuse me. He said, I am going to tell you of what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns the appointed time of the end. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes is the first king. The four horns that replace the one that was broken off represent four kingdoms that will emerge from his nation, but will not have the same power.
Now, it's Daniel's predictions about Greece that get him in trouble with non-believers. Because a man shouldn't be able to know that many details about a nation that's going to arise several hundred years after his lifetime. And his prediction here through his dream that God gave him is that first horn is the first king. It will be broken off at the height of its power and four will come up. Well, guess what? If you read Greek history, Alexander the Great conquered the world in about 3 years, but died at 33. I'm trying to remember. It might have been lead poisoning or something from drinking too much wine in lead glasses. It was something weird like that. But he died at the height of his power. And the tradition says that he didn't want to designate a successor. And so he said, to the strongest, when they asked him, to the strongest. And so these four strongest generals all tried to take the kingdom, and they battled each other and ended up with four separate kingdoms out of the one Grecian empire that Alexander had built. This is out of a Western civilization book. They probably don't even use it anymore. Back when I was a campus minister, one of my college students brought me his Western civilization book. So after I taught on this, so I could see that sure enough, the four generals divided the kingdom. And I'm going to come over here just so I can read it. So some of the younger commanders contested the arrangement, and a series of wars followed, which culminated in the decisive Battle of Ipsus. The result was a new division among the victors. Seleucus took possession of Persia, Mesopotamia, and Syria. Lysimachus, that's the second one, assumed control over Asia Minor and Thrace. Cassander, that's the third, established himself in Macedonia. And Ptolemy added Phoenicia and Palestine. Four generals divided the kingdom into four empires. That's exactly what Daniel predicted a long time ago. Now, I'm not going to read all of this today, and it's a good thing I debated whether to add it in because it gets complicated, and since I lost 10 minutes on the front end, it's probably a good thing I didn't. But if you read Daniel 10 and 11, there is detailed information about what happens during the third Grecian Empire, about kings that battle each other, and then it talks about a Grecian king that will go and offer an abominable sacrifice in the Holy of Holies. And he's predicting Antioch Epiphanes that actually came, and you can read about this in Maccabees. It's not in the canon, but after the Bible was completed, the Jews continued to battle with the Greeks. And you can read about the history of that in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And they talk about Antiochus Epiphanes, and how he came and desecrated the temple by sacrificing a pig in there because he was just sort of making fun of the Jewish God. Well, that's predicted in Daniel. And so because Daniel has so much detail predicting history, it comes under attack because a lot of people think there's no way that a human being can know the future. And so they say it must have been written along after it. Now, one of the arguments that is an old argument, doesn't exist anymore, in Daniel chapter 5. Did I give anybody else scriptures I didn't have you read by any chance? Okay, I didn't think so. What's yours? Oh, okay, I do. Okay, hang on to those. We'll get to them. Thanks. Okay, so in Daniel chapter 5, it's the end of the Babylonian kingdom, and Belshazzar is the last king. And so Belshazzar comes, or Belshazzar has this big party. He has all of these utensils that they had stolen from the temple in Jerusalem, and he brings them to the party. He says, we're going to have fun, and we're going to enjoy it, and all these gold utensils we stole from the temple in Jerusalem. And a hand appears by itself and writes on the wall, mene, mene, tekel, tekel, upsarshin, upsarshin. I can't remember. I didn't even read it. That's out of memory. That might be right. It's close. But what it says is something like, your kingdom's been weighed and has found to be lacking. And he says, you will be destroyed this night, and that night the Persians came in and destroyed them. Well, the Babylonian records that list all the kings starts with Nabonidus. And that's it. That's the last king of Babylon. So for many years, people said, well, that shows that not only was it probably written afterwards because people can't predict history, but it shows that Daniel isn't accurate. Well, that has been disproven for a long time now because they found the Nabonidus cylinder, and Nabonidus says that he went off to do some wars and put his son Belshazzar, same name as what Daniel identifies, in charge of the kingdom. And so it was while he was gone fighting these wars that the Persians came down and destroyed his kingdom. And I believe that Nabonidus maybe died in one of those wars, if I remember. I'm not positive about that. But anyhow, it confirms the Bible story. So there's another argument that's made. It's Daniel is the only book in the Old Testament not written completely in Hebrew. It's partly written in Aramaic. And it starts in chapter 2, verse 4. And so it's in Hebrew till it gets to 2 verse 3. And then in verse 4 it says, then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, and that verse is in Aramaic, and from that until 728, it's all in Aramaic. Now, of course, Daniel would have to know Aramaic because you can be sure Nebuchadnezzar probably didn't know Hebrew. And he was trained as a young man in the palace. He was an expert. He became a wise man. And Nebuchadnezzar put him in charge of a lot of things and trusted him because he could predict the future and interpret his dreams. And so, I don't think that necessarily precludes Daniel from having written it, because he may have written that some for the people that were around him to read. But then when he gets to the end of chapter 7 and chapter 8, he apparently wrote it to a Hebrew audience and wanted to save it for that. So there's nothing wrong with that. But they go a little bit deeper, and the argument is made that the Aramaic that's used in Daniel was from a period much later, like 150 BC. Now, the reason they want to get it down to 150 BC is that's after all these events have happened. So now, no wonder he could have all these detail. But it's funny, there's a book out by Paul Butler, printed by College Press. It's not in print anymore because I went and looked it up. But he covers all this stuff in tremendous detail. So this information defending Daniel has been around for a long time. This is not new. And one of the things that you can read about in his books is that he went and showed the actual words they were claiming were Aramaic of a later time and the actual style, and gives proof of it. But they found all these tablets from Ugarit in Aramaic that were before the time of Daniel and before the time of the Persian kingdom. And guess what? Same words, same style is what was used in Daniel. So the argument that the Aramaic was from a later time period just doesn't hold any water. It's just another attempt by people who are trying to discredit Daniel to show why you shouldn't believe it. Now, so one other thing, and we're going to a different topic right now. We're going to put Daniel aside. This is all still related to Daniel, though. So Jeremiah 25, verse 11.
This whole land will be a desolation and a horror. These nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years.
Okay. So Jeremiah is written about the time when Babylon is coming down and destroying Jerusalem, and he says that they're going to be destroyed for 70 years. Now, read Daniel 9, 1 through 2. I didn't give that to anybody. Okay, I guess I was talking to myself. Okay, Daniel 9, 1 through 2. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, by descent a Mede, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, perceived in the books the number of years that, according to the word of the Lord to Jeremiah, the prophet, must pass before the end of the desolations of Jerusalem, namely 70 years. Somehow, he had a copy of Jeremiah. And Daniel was reading it and said, Jeremiah said that 70 years after the captivity of Babylon. Now notice that Babylon isn't in charge of the world anymore. The Persians have come, or they're about to come. And so it said 70 years later that that God was going to end the desolation of Jerusalem. So Isaiah also talks about this in Isaiah chapter 44, verse 28.
Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt.
So he calls Cyrus out by name. He calls him out again in 45, verse 1. So Jeremiah says this captivity will last 70 years. Daniel reads, finds out about it. Isaiah says Cyrus is the name of the person that is going to let Israel go. Now, you can just imagine that people think that Isaiah chapter 44 was written after the time of Cyrus because they don't believe that prophecy could happen. But Isaiah writes this before Cyrus even was the king of the world. And so Ezra 1 through 4, and who has that? Okay, read that.
In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. And in any locality where survivors may now be living, the people are to provide them with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, with free will offerings for the temple of God in Jerusalem.
So Ezra, during the time of Cyrus, was told he could go back and build Jerusalem. And this is the Cyrus cylinder, and they found all these writings by King Cyrus of Persia, and on this cylinder it says that Cyrus said that all the peoples that they conquered could go back and build their own temples and worship their gods again. So it wasn't just Jerusalem, but all the people, confirming the Bible story. And in fact, this is Olmsted, who is a renowned Persian historian, and he says that all of this is historical. Ezra's historical, Nehemiah's historical. There's all sorts of evidence, and those are all people that lived confirming the Bible history during all this time. And so Jeremiah predicted it'd be 70 years. Daniel thought it was getting close to that time, studied it. Isaiah predicted the name of the king, and history confirms that that's exactly what happened. So let me say this. We have about 2 or 3 more minutes. I'm sorry I rushed a little bit today, trying to catch up. But so we'll have a test next week. I'm expecting y'all to remember names like Belshazzar and Artaxerxes. I didn't even talk about him, but I want you to remember his name, and Nabonidus and all these different things. No, not really. So what do you do with this? Well, first, I hope it just helps increase your faith. You don't have to remember all these details for it to increase your faith, to see it was there. And someone says, well, there's nothing in the Bible. No, there is. I've seen it all. Now, one of the other good things is we got this on video. And if somebody's really interested, say, well, come here, I'll show you a video. And one of the reasons that we're doing what we've been doing, if you remember last year about this time, Barry and I talked about God and creation. Remember that? And so that's something you could go watch. And there are a lot of great videos out there on God and creation that you can show people if they have problems with that. There's not as many on this sort of thing, so you have this one now. So you can show these videos. And so it's to help increase and boast your faith, but also if you run into someone that has a problem with this, then you can share this with them. And also you can, you don't have to remember it all to say, no, that's not right. I've seen some of the evidence. Well, can you repeat it? Oh, no, I forgot to take notes and it was complicated, but I got a video I can show you. And so it's important for us to know that it is faith, because I can't see God, but it's not based on just myth or imagination, that our faith is based on a long history that shows the evidence of God working first with the Hebrews and even before them through the creation of the world, and then through Jesus and then through his church. So your faith rests on a foundation of evidences and reasoning that is sound. We aren't just ignorant faith believers. There's, a religion, I won't tell you who they are, that says you read their book and there's not any historical proof for it. And how do I know if it's true? Well, just pray and God will let you know. If he says yes, yes. If it's no, it's no. And we think he'll say yes. Well, okay. There's a lot of things you might believe if that's going to be your criteria. Our faith is deeper than that. And it has a foundation of history and evidence and miracles, and that's why we believe. So next week will be the last one in this series. We're going to look at the archaeological evidence of Jericho and read the story of the conquest of Jericho and Joshua and see how miraculously that city is conquered, and that the archaeological evidence itself confirms the Bible story in great detail. And I'll give you a little bit more hint of some of the dating problems that happened during Egyptian time and Moses and Noah. And that will be a series I'll do in the future. So I'm going to go back to seeing if I can fix the slides for my sermon. God bless you.